it. So, good afternoon and welcome to Sense Making Conversations. My name is Andrea Sampson, and I'm going to be your host and your guide as we delve deeply into the issues that are impacting us all. Now, we just passed the 1 year anniversary of the declaration of the global pandemic. And I know that we have all felt the impacts from lockdown to shifts in our social life. I mean, what's it like to have a social life anymore, right? To the economic impact. We are in times, I think, of chaotic recovery. And I say that because I can see some glimmers of hope. I can see things opening up. I can see with the vaccines getting out that things are getting a little better. But it still feels very different, right? Because all of our habits have changed. I mean, think about it. Everything we did a year ago on a pretty regular basis, we're not doing anymore. And we have to reestablish those habits. Those ingrained structures have changed. And we have all had to adapt. And for many, it's meant feelings of overwhelm, anxiety, depression, and for some, even suicidal thoughts. I mean, this is really hard, right? When you look at the statistics, they do tell a story. A study done by UBC reports that only 21% of Canadians are feeling hopeful. I'm hoping that's rising. And BJM Journals reports that over 44% of parents are reporting worse mental health than before the pandemic. Mental Health Research Canada reports that 42% of Canadians have been diagnosed with either depression or anxiety, or most concerning is that CAMH is reporting the suicidal thoughts amongst Canadians have increased from 2.5% pre-pandemic to almost 10% now and this was done in October of 2020. And this brings us to today's topic, thriving through chaos. How can we begin to help ourselves and our loved ones and all of those around us as we move through these chaotic times? And these are the questions I put to our guest today, Louisa Jewell. Now, before I go into Louisa, I just want to have a quick look and see how everyone who's with us is doing. So I see Kathy, you're joining from Mississauga. Welcome. Today was a rough day. Yeah, it was. I've tried to limit my news consumption, but yesterday was a bit grim. Yeah, I think that probably, I'm not sure what you're referring to there, but it could be about the vaccine. I know there was some notes on that, and I hope you're feeling okay. Um, Brenda is joining us from London and is feeling great. So for anyone else who wants to let us know how you're feeling, I do want us all to feel like we're amongst friends here. And let me introduce you to one of my friends and somebody who I admire. Louisa Jewell is a talk boutique speaker. She was somebody who I've worked with closely, and she holds a master's degree in applied psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and is the founder and president of the Canadian Positive Psychology Association. Louisa is also the host of the Awesome Project, a new Audible Originals podcast that's about to be released. And Louisa, we want to hear all about that in a couple of moments.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Andrea. It's so
You're
great to
welcome.
be here.
I don't want to finish there because you've got so many things that I think people need to know that you have done. You are known, right, for educating people and practitioners around the world about the neuroscience of resiliency. Louisa appears regularly on CBC Radio as a well-being expert. Maybe some of you have heard her, and has been featured extensively in other media, including Forbes, Fast Company, and Oprah Magazine. She's featured in several documentaries, including The Science of Happiness and Mental Health in the City. And her best-selling book, Wire Your Brain for Confidence. And if you don't have this, you should go out and buy it. It was named one of the top 100 best psychology books of all time by Book Authority. All right, Louisa, come on in and welcome. I absolutely love our conversations, and I know our guests will as well. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Andrea. I feel like I've turned a corner. It was getting, I could feel myself going downhill. And that's the good thing about what I do, is that when I feel myself going south, I have the strategies to be able to put those into practice and be a little bit more diligent about them, or think of more practices I could be doing that then
Mm,
can bring me back on course. So that's
yeah.
the thing, that even if you know this information, you still struggle. We're all struggling. This is quite an incredible experience that we're all going through.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I think I live in downtown Toronto. I know when I look out my window, I overlook a park, which is lovely, but that's about the only nature I get to see. In these times of lockdown. And it does get difficult. And I'm a really positive person, and I know that it has gotten me down. So, when you look at this through the lens of psychology, and I mean, you focus on positivity. So, can you help break it down? What is actually going on?
So I kind of look at this as four major challenges to our mental well-being. And that's what positive psychology is. It's the scientific study of psychological well-being. So, how do we keep ourselves healthy and happy? So, the four challenges that I see with this pandemic, number one is we are hardwired for social connection, and that is obviously being challenged. So, I have some ideas around that. Number two is because it's very difficult for us to see our future, we that contributes to a lack of hope, and hope is critical to our well-being. So that is another challenge. The third challenge that I see to our mental well-being is the isolation, the lack of touch and intimacy with others. That's another challenge. And fourth, just the chronic level of stress, and what do we do about that to manage that? Because it's not stress is not so much bad for you if it comes at you and it goes away, but when it's constant, that's when stress can be a barrier to well-being and physical well-being as well.
I think you bring up some really interesting points. I mean, the one that, and I know when you and I, a couple of weeks ago, we got together to talk about what we wanted to talk about today. And I know the one that really shook me maybe a little bit was this idea of the loss of hope. And it was, I think you languaged something that I had been feeling, but hadn't actually been able to language it. And that idea of the loss of hope was the thing that was, I think, for me, most helpful. So maybe you can unpack that a little bit about why is hope so important when we're in these places of despair. I mean, yes, it's always nice to have hope. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, of course. But but what is it about hope that helps us when we're in these places? Why is that important? And how do we reestablish some of that in our lives?
Well, a lot of people think that we are driven, all our behaviors, activities are driven by the past. And positive psychologists have an alternative. And in their scientific study, they find that people are actually propelled by the future. We call it prospection. So we are pulled by the future. And when we can see a positive future, we have hope. And that's what keeps us going. And that's what keeps us motivated. So that kind of positive vision of the future is important to our well-being. So when the pandemic hit, so I'm a speaker and I speak at conferences. So when the pandemic hit, literally my business was decimated within a matter of a few days. Usually I can see my year, I can see my speaking engagements right out for the rest of the year. And it just disappeared within a matter of a day or two, it was all gone.
Yeah.
So I redirected my focus to try to see, okay, I'm going to rebuild and do a lot of virtual stuff. But I really realized, because I had lost everything, and after a while, I started to feel that kind of have feelings of depression and stress. And I thought, when I sat down, we do a common exercise in positive psychology called your future best self. And what you do is you write down think of yourself kind of 5 years into the future. Everything that you've wanted to have happen in your life has happened. You're feeling good about it. And you sit down and you write about it for 20 minutes every night for 3 nights in a row. And I thought I'm going to do a future best self exercise. And I couldn't do it because I could not see the future.
Yeah.
And so, right, because I thought, how long is this going to last? So I decided instead to do my future best self, but only for 6 months. I thought, given all the restrictions, what can I still do? What can I still plan? What can I still engage in that, even with everything that's going on, that would give me some things to look forward to over the next 6 months? So I planned hiking trips. I booked a cottage. I booked online parties, on walks in the neighborhood, morning walks in the forest, because we know that getting out in nature is very important to well-being. So that improved my hope considerably. So if you think about it for yourself, you want to be able to think of things in the future that you can look forward to.
Mm. I think that's, so wise. Like, I know that's been one of the things for me as I've been thinking about, the future, because we all have to think about the future. And when we're in this place of, of pause almost, right? Especially when we've been in lockdown, it seems like our lives are in pause. And so it's difficult to imagine that future, because everything, as I was saying earlier, and when I started, that all of our, even our habits have changed. Like we don't get up the same way we used to. I mean, for so many of us who have worked outside of the home, 9 to 5 or 9 to whenever, we were getting up and rushing to, take our showers and brush our teeth and, get ourselves out the door into a commute to go somewhere. And
That's
that's not the
right.
case anymore. Suddenly we are now, getting up and, hopefully we're still all showering and brushing our teeth, but, it might look a little different. And maybe it's, not quite as frenzied, and maybe, not quite as purposeful. And so having that future self, like being able to go, okay, will there be a time in the future where that getting up and going out of the house is going to be a daily occurrence again? So
Yeah.
that putting that in place is kind of it's key, right?
And what I found too is that when you're planning for the future, you can either do it with fear and uncertainty, or you can just let the feeling of uncertainty go. Because we know from neuroscience that when things are uncertain, that triggers the brain. So you kind of have to say, I don't know what's going to happen over the next 6 months. So I will think about the things that I know are in my control. I'm going to focus on those things, and I'm going to be driven by the passion and love for the things that I do rather than by fear, because I found myself just worrying about what was going to happen as opposed to being driven and motivated by just loving what I do and continuing to help as many people as possible. So that was a real shift for me too. Can you
Mm.
let the worry go? And there's one tool that I use when I'm worrying about something. There's one tool that I use, and that is, I say to myself, well, that could happen, but probably the most likely that will happen is this. And if that happens, I'll do this. So I have a plan if something should happen, rather than worrying all the time about that thing that I think may or may not happen. I just think to myself, well, if it should happen, probably the most likely is this will happen instead. And if that happens, I'll do this. And
Right.
then,
Yeah. So just
yeah,
having those plans, right? Like, so like being able to look ahead and go, there will be a tomorrow, there will be a next month, there will be 3 months from now, there will be 6 months from now. It
yeah,
may look different. And, as humans, we're slow to adapt. Let's face it, we don't like change. And so that's a reality. But having that, just being able to look forward and saying, this is where I am today. And, the most likely thing to happen would be this other thing
that's
or
right.
not. But just having that, I mean, it does make a huge, huge, difference in terms of our own outlook. And I just want to actually reach out to our listeners and go, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat. We would love to hear from you. And I know that some of you might be a little shy. That's okay. You can either type it in there and I'll put it out there for you, or if you would like to join us in this conversation, we welcome you to.
Yeah.
Um, what do we do, as we are looking at building that positive vision of the future? Because I think that's what we're talking about, right? So it's like, okay, let's think of that positive. Let's look out 6 months. Maybe we can't look out more than that, but we can look out 6 months.
Yeah.
Um, what do we do next? Like, how do we, because, I live alone and it gets pretty lonely here day after day after day. And, I've got my cats, so I do get some cuddles, but other than that, I'm pretty alone. So, how can we, there are many, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people like me. So what do we do in those moments of isolation and loneliness? How do we help bridge some of that?
Okay, good question. And so I'm alone too. So I feel very, very isolated. And there's a few consequences on our well being because of that. First of all, the lack of intimacy and touch. So even if I do go and see my friends and we're socially distanced outside, we still don't touch each other. We still don't hold each other and hug each other. Yesterday, I did my the last recordings for my Audible podcast, and I was so excited. I brought a bottle of prosecco, but we had to stand far away. I couldn't hug them and say I couldn't hug the team and say thank you for all your hard work. We had been working on it for so many months. You just can't touch people. So offer yourself your own touch. So it's called the whole study of this practice is called havening. So you can be, and really it's about, and I don't know much about it. I'm not an expert in it, but you want to be touching yourself, giving yourself these kind of pleasant feelings of touch if you're missing that kind of touch. So that's kind of one thing that you can do with the intimacy piece. Now,
Mm.
with the social connection piece, it is important that we're looking people in the eyes. So this idea, if you're only texting or doing stuff on Facebook or doing social media, you really want to be actually seeing people if you can. So I get out in nature. And even when it was 20 below, I didn't care. I had lots of clothes on. We would literally sit outside in the freezing cold. I'd be wearing my snow pants and my big parka, big Russian hat and mitts, and we have our glass of wine, and we would still, be far away from each other, but we would still see each other. So it
Yeah.
is important to have that social connection. And the other research on loneliness. So loneliness is an interesting thing because we think if you're isolated, then you must be feeling lonely. And that's not the case because a lot of the times we can be home alone and not feel lonely at all. And then other times we can be surrounded by a ton of people and feel lonely. And so, what is at the heart of loneliness? It is a thing called mattering. Do we feel that we matter in other people's lives? And this is the work of Dr. Isaac Pilotensky. And what he has noted is that there's two ways to matter. When somebody tells you that they value you, if you want to make someone feel that they matter and they belong, tell them how much you value them. But the other
Mm.
way, on the other side of mattering, is do you make others feel that they matter? Do you add value to other people's lives? Can you reach out and do a kindness for somebody else? Can you volunteer? Can you do someone a favor? Can you take care of somebody? Because that makes you feel like you matter to this person because you're helping them. And sometimes we feel like we have to matter to the world, right? We have to think it's as big as Oprah
Mhm.
Winfrey. And that's not the case. Just think about your own little world, your family,
So
your
true.
friends, right? Your
You
community,
know,
your neighbors, right?
it's so true. Like every now and then, I'll get a text from somebody who I haven't spoken with for a while, and it'll just be a, hey, just saying hi. And it does. It suddenly makes you feel like you're not alone. It makes you, again, in that moment, somebody is thinking about you. And it's a really important um, piece around feeling like you are special in someone else's life, and of course
Yes.
we have family who we know that we have a place in their world, but I mean, I think this really speaks to this concept of having positive thoughts throughout the day versus negative thoughts, because it can be easy to go down that sinkhole of, oh gosh, I've just spent the last 4 hours watching Netflix, right? And depending on what you were watching, it might not have been good for your mood.
Right.
We actually do have, actually, before I go into that, we have a question from the audience. You make a good point about uncertainty. Our basic beliefs and assumptions about safety and organized life have been upended. How do you recommend dealing with shifts in such beliefs? Because it's the lack of such foundational beliefs that is causing a lot of day-to-day angst. And yeah, I think this actually fits to where we were going.
So I didn't get the first part. So what is the belief?
So our basic belief and assumption about safety and organized life have been upended,
Mm,
right? And
mm, yeah.
so I think it's
Yeah.
that issue around, like, how do we have a belief that says we are going to come out of this, that we are going to be okay, that that life will find some form of normalcy, maybe not the same, but
Right.
a new normal. And I think that's the, um, how do we reestablish some of those beliefs?
Yeah. Well, really, when you think about it, uncertainty is probably the only certain thing in our lives, right? And right, and change. I mean, I can tell you five things that happened to me that blew my world apart even before COVID hit. So sometimes we can get this feeling that, everything, we're just coasting along and everything is perfect. But really, the human condition, and that's one of the three elements that Kristen Neff talks about in terms of self compassion, is that when we understand that this is the human condition, things are going to throw us off kilter. Things may change your world considerably, and you never know when they're going to come your way. So, to me, I always use gratitude as a grounding. And I say, well, I lost my business, but I'm grateful. I live in a nice house, I can ride this wave until I get virtual. I'm really grateful for that, you know. Lots of people kept their jobs through this whole thing, in which they said, I'm so grateful I still have my job and my paycheck. I didn't have that. So I just sit on gratitude. I'm so grateful I haven't gotten the virus, right? That I've been healthy, that my friends have been healthy. So I think when you can sit in gratitude and say, well, it could be worse, right? That's one perspective. When we think about it, we think, well, life could be worse, and it is worse for a lot of people. So we always have to keep that in perspective, that we're pretty lucky here in Canada
Yeah,
with what we have.
I agree. I mean, gratitudes are something that I do gratitudes every morning. I know you and I have talked about this, and I also journal every morning. And I think that's another way, the exercise you spoke about around the future self.
Yeah.
So combining gratitudes along with a future self exercise that you do daily in some form of a journal that allows you to reinforce and speak to yourself. Speak to yourself. I think it's maybe, and this is maybe my own perspective, and would love to hear your perspective on it. Is that I think at times we tell ourselves stories that are terrorizing us. We tend to be our own terrorists, and so when we start writing down what we're saying to ourselves in our head, because we would never say these things out loud, but we do inside of
Right.
our own head. And
Right.
so when we write them down and we start to see and we start to shift them, so rather than writing the story of fear, you write it from a place of, this is what I want, this is who I am, what are the things that are true, I'm
Yes.
okay in this moment, i am I am solid in this moment. I live in a house that I love in this moment.
Yes.
These are the things that I have right now. And so when I have these things and when I can acknowledge them, I can say in this moment, I am okay. And I'm grateful for
Yeah,
all I've gotten to learn in this moment. And then you come to
exactly.
the next moment. And I think for me, that's been very helpful as we have moved through the pandemic, of just remembering all of all of the blessings that I have in my life, as opposed to all of the beliefs that are driving me to a new place,
Yeah,
or drive me to a place I don't want to be.
yeah,
I don't want to miss this one, because this was so impactful again for me when you and I talked. And this was about planning your day and creating an awareness
right.
of how to keep yourself positive. And you had this really, I mean, I loved this little exercise. And I think you know the one I'm talking about. You called it ripples and waves.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay.
I would love for you to help our listeners understand that concept of ripples and waves.
Right. So Dr. Michelle McQuaid talks about this concept of ripples and waves. So what we're finding in the research is that you need to experience positive emotions and many more positive emotions to negative emotions in the day. So when you're in chronic stress and worry, you've got this negative churn going on. So how do you combat that? By having many more positive emotional experiences. So this is just about having pleasant experiences. So you have to plan out what we call ripples and waves, because the intensity of positive emotions makes a difference. So ripples are just small things in your day. Taking the dog for a nice walk in the forest, that might be a little something a little bit longer you do in your day, or just sitting and petting your dog for 5 minutes, savoring your dog, putting on a really funny YouTube clip. Dr. McQuaid, what she'll do is she anchors it with going to the washer. So because then she just wants to make sure she fits it in. So she'll watch something funny, or she'll do something that brings her joy. We just call these little small jolts of joy, and you plan them out throughout the day. You could have a timer that you're going to do something. And what happens is when you just fill your body with positive emotions, you start to combat that high level of negativity. And then the waves are more of these big things that I was talking about earlier. Planning out the hiking trips with your friends, planning out the cottage trip that you're going to take, planning to have something where you have a little bit higher intensity positive emotions coming in. And that will, again, what that does is it, first of all, the feelings of anticipation that you're going to go. So those give you good positive thoughts and feelings. But also afterwards, it gives you great memories to be able to savor some of the things that you've done. If we do something, my friend will create a mug, for example, with a picture of what we did that day. And it's not great. It's not a huge thing now with COVID, but it was still a lot of fun and still memorable and more of a wave than a ripple.
You know what? That I mean, like I can't tell you how just even hearing you talk about planning, I'm such a planner. I love to plan things. And I'm like, oh, I miss that so much. I really want to plan something, like it just, there's a sense of relief just in hearing you say that. And
Yeah.
so, even the doing of it is something that I would look forward to, of
Yeah.
like, oh, when's my next trip? I don't know when it's going to be, but where am I going to go? And what might be the things that I'm going to see when I'm there, and who will I meet up with, and
Yeah.
all of those fun things that we do, that I know everybody has their own form of this, whether I know so many people who love planning celebrations, and what's the menu going to look like.
But
And
that's a great idea, Andrea. I really like that idea that couldn't you plan a trip? Like get into all the details and plan it. And maybe you can't press the button to say, okay, let me book the flights, but it's all ready to go. That when it comes time, right? You got
yeah.
it. And yet you've had all this anticipatory savoring, which is another way to bring
Oh,
positive emotions. I love that idea.
yeah, I mean, it's all so much fun. And you know what, Louisa, I can't believe it. We're at 12:30. I
Oh,
cannot believe. I know. We've gotten through all of our time, and this has been incredible. You've given us some really good things to be able to focus upon. I mean, that future self exercise, I want you all to think about that, and anyone who's listening to this, there is such power in really just looking ahead at who you will be, who you want to be in that 6 month period. If you can do it for further, do that. But don't force yourself. Give yourself just a short window, because that's where you can see. Maybe that's all you can see from where you are. Also gratitudes. I cannot say enough about gratitudes. I do it every day. I have friends who I actually text every day, and we text each other what we're grateful for. And it's a beautiful exercise. It's a great way to get to know people even deeper. The idea of just looking at where you are and level setting where safety, where your safety is in this moment, where your hope is in this moment. And then the ripples and waves, like the ripples, where are you getting a little ripple? Where are you getting a little ripple of joy, a little ripple of hope? Maybe it's watching a cat video. Maybe that's just me, but these are things that, they do help us. Pet your animal, go and spend 3 minutes with a child and just watch their wonder. Do those things that give you that little ripple of hope throughout your day. And then do some planning and get a wave. Start to build the wave of excitement. It gets you into that place of hope. There is so much here to take away. And Louisa is such a pro at this. Thank you for sharing your wisdom
Thank
with
you,
us.
Andrea. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. I would love to. I mean, I'd love to have you back again, Louisa. I always learn so much. So
Anytime.
hopefully we'll plan another one soon. And this brings us to the end of today's conversation. Join us next week when we have Mary Donahue with us, who's also going to talk about mental health and how we can use our digital devices to help us to go beyond the moment and get into a more practice where our devices actually help us. Have an amazing rest of your day. And thank you again, Louisa, for all of your wisdom and helping us move forward in these challenging times.